It's the AEMT lecture series. Welcome back. This will be video number 1 for chapter 20, the acute abdomen. So a lot to talk about. Pull you up a chair, grab you a cup of coffee. This tends to be kind of a type of boring chapter, maybe you could call it. Not a whole lot of new material here for you guys, unfortunately. You've heard it before. But we'll try to make it interesting as I can. So let's start and talk about the abdomen. Let's talk about the AMP maybe. Maybe we'll talk about the anatomy and physiology of the gastrointestinal system, and we'll start there. Let's start with identifying some of our organs, and let's talk about what solid organs are in the abdomen. So we have solid organs. Oops. All right, and what do they consist of? Well, the liver, okay, the spleen, the pancreas, okay, the kidneys, and your ovaries. Maybe not your ovaries, maybe somebody else's ovaries, since we don't have any girls in our class this go around. But so your liver, spleen, pancreas, and kidneys, and ovaries in women. And so what's important here to know about these solid organs? Well, they're very vascular. Okay, so they're very vascular. And we could expect what? Lots of blood loss, right? If we have an injury. Okay. Some important information to know. Right, so let's talk about retroperitoneal. All right, going back, right? And then I think I spelled that right, peritoneal, right? And so what organs are retroperitoneal organs? Well, we would consider the pancreas, the kidneys, and then females, the ovaries, to be retroperitoneal organs. All right. All right, so now let's talk about what are considered the organs of the digestive system. And so when we talk about these organs, we want to know what their function is. Okay, it helps us to critically think in the field. If we know what their function is, at least we know what they do. All right, so the function though of the digestive system, right? What's the function of the digestive system? Well, we should know this by now. We know that it's going to absorb, right? It's going to absorb the products of digestion. So it absorbs the products of digestion and it needs to fuel the cells. They gotta eat. And the little cells gotta have their food, okay? So we're gonna talk about some of the organs now that are involved in that. All right. So obviously the mouth is, right? And, you know, your mouth includes your teeth. Something, you know, you got to be able to, you know, eat and tear that food up in order to be able to swallow it. Whoops. Then we have your salivary glands. All right, so what do these guys do? Well, they're going to provide lubrication, okay, and they're going to release some enzymes. Okay, so lubrication and enzymes. And so those enzymes are going to help to start breaking down that food. Okay, that's their goal, to release those enzymes. Is a chemical that helps to break down carbohydrates into sugars. All right. What about the esophagus? All right, so the esophagus pushes food. So it's going to be pushes food. Right, but it uses something. Okay, it uses a term that we should be aware of called peristalsis. Okay, peristalsis. Okay, and so when we see peristalsis, we need to think rhythm. Okay, it's that rhythm contraction type movement that moves food along. Okay, it's muscles using that type of rhythm type food that actually maybe rhythm. How do you say it? Rhythmic contractions. Okay. All right, so that is how that works. So let's talk now about the stomach itself. All right, so the esophagus will then go down and meet the stomach. Okay, so we're going to talk about the stomach. All right, and the stomach, what function of the stomach? So the function of the stomach is to break down food. Okay, it's going to break down food, but before we get there, back up just a little bit because I want to talk about the anatomy behind this. So you have the junction where the esophagus and stomach meet, right? And that's going to be called the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter, S-P-H. Yeah, I-N-C-T-E-R, the cardiac sphincter. Okay. All right, and that's the junction. Okay, the junction. All right, where the esophagus, I'm going to abbreviate, meets the stomach. All right, so we're doing good. And it's All right, so the cardiac sphincter is going to have a function here. And its function is to prevent food from backing up into the esophagus. Okay, that's the function of your cardiac sphincter. Now, if you can imagine this, it's kind of cool. Kind of neat, kind of different. All right, here's your esophagus. And so wrapping around your esophagus. Okay, so wrapping around your esophagus is veins. Okay. All right, so these veins intertwine around the esophagus and drain into another complex series of veins. How about we do it like this? Complex. All right, and so these veins join to form the portal vein. Oh, daggone, what was ugly? That was nothing but ugly. That pen's just, wow. All right, let me try to draw a vein here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is actually tell you where this goes. And I'm just going to write liver, because that's where it's going to end up going. All right. And so why is this important? Well, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to get there. If you ever have any type of like liver failure or liver disease, it affects blood backing up. So if you have blood backing up into that complex series of veins and then backing up in here, going up, right? Your book tells you that what happens is these veins dilate, meaning there's so much pressure on those veins that instead of their normal size, they become a lot bigger because they're full. Okay, so they're dilating because there's so much pressure on them. Okay, and so what happens what could happen, well, let me tell you this, in other veins, all right, so hang on one second. In other veins, let me draw it out here. Not this vein, I'm just talking veins in general. Let me draw a little vein out here. There's something called valves. And these valves kind of look like this. They'll kind of come up. Okay, and they just kind of rise up like that. And well, what that's doing is it's causing that vein to become smaller in certain areas so that when blood comes through, blood bumps off that and pops up. And these are found in veins returning to the left atrium. Okay, these are found in veins returning to the left atrium because this little bump helps to increase velocity of the blood. Because we need that extra velocity. Why? Because we're moving uphill. That blood is moving uphill. And so we need little tricks. We need little things to increase velocity so that we make it back up to the left atrium. This doesn't have valves because it was never intended for blood to ever move back up in this area. It's always intended for it to go down, meet the portal vein, and end up in the liver. So that's the reason why it doesn't have valves. Well, even though it doesn't have valves, it's still backing up and backs up, and there's nothing to prevent it from backing up because there wasn't a design put in for that. And if this thing ends up bursting, okay, have an aneurysm, it can be called an esophageal varices. All right, and so you don't want that. That's the physiology behind that, and we see that. And imagine having all this blood rushing up your esophagus, and these are usually pretty intense bleeding, and they're big airway problems. And it's not a good day when you have this call. And so if you see it, you'll know it because there's nothing else like it. All right, so we conquered that. We were talking about the cardiac sphincter, and we talked about the veins. The portal vein. What does the portal vein do? Okay, so the portal vein, it transports venous blood from the GI tract to the liver for processing nutrients. That's what the portal vein does. All right, we talked about that. So now let's talk about the stomach a little more. Let's talk about the stomach a little more. Okay, so we have our stomach. All right, and so the stomach needs to do a couple things. All right, so it's a container for food, right? But what is found inside the stomach is hydrochloric acid. Okay, and so we have this hydrochloric acid that's going to mix with the food. Okay, because it has to mix with this food and take food, big chunks of food, and it needs to make it into like a chyme type liquid. Okay, so that's what it has to do to be able to send it to the next part. And then we have the next part of the stomach. It's called the pyloric sphincter. And that's known as the doorway to the inferior portion of the stomach. Okay, doorway to the inferior or lower. All right, stomach. And so that's the part that's going to lead to the next thing we're going to talk about. So the pyloric sphincter sits right at the at the small intestine. Okay, so we'll talk about it next. All right, and so when we talk about the small intestine, the first part is called the duodenum. The duodenum. Okay, and this is going to be where the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder connect to the digestive system. Okay, and so what its job is to absorb yes, right. So it's going to absorb resources. For use by other cells. So what is it talking about? So the stomach's going to give us this. The stomach's going to give us this liquid. All right, let's make a little green liquid. Okay, there's a green liquid. All right, and so what's going to happen is the small intestine is going to absorb that. So it's going to absorb that. And it's going to absorb it. And then, and how it absorbs it is I want to tell you right. Okay, so I'm fixing to tell you what I think and then correct it if I'm wrong. So it's going to absorb it just kind of like your capillaries do. Has some veins in there and venules inside those small intestines, and it's going to absorb it and send it into the bloodstream where those nutrients can be used to feed the cell. Okay, so it absorbs through veins and capillaries, and then those veins and capillaries obviously go to the bloodstream, and so that we can take those nutrients besides oxygen. That's part of perfusion. It's to deliver oxygen and nutrients, and the removal of waste meets the definition of perfusion. This is a nutrient part. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. Now it's going to need a little help in this area. Would you expect this stuff right here to be real acidic? It is. It's very acidic because it just came out of the stomach, right? And so it's going to use something called bicarb. And we know what bicarb does. It's going to raise the pH, because the pH in this hydrochloric acid's 3, I think, way low. We're going to raise that so it won't be so caustic. It's going to raise the pH, which is good. All right. And then it's going to get a little more help because it's going to get something called amylase from the pancreas. It's an enzyme. And all this is going to do is take starch and turn it into sugar. Because when the body, cell loves sugar, so we're going to provide that through that enzyme. No big deal. And we get that from the pancreas. Pancreas is going to help us out there. It's going to give us a little amylase. Okay. And so we're going to talk about the liver next. So let's talk about the liver. Let me get a new paper here. All right, we got the liver. So what's the liver do? So the liver, let's see, let me catch up in my notes here. Make sure I'm telling y'all right. All right, let me back up so that we're clear on this. The pancreas, I said a minute ago, because I don't want to get everybody confused here. The pancreas provides that amylase to the small intestine, okay? So let's talk about what the pancreas does real quick. Oh man, see what I'm talking about? It's this pen. It's got a mind of its own. It spells what it wants to spell. All right, so the pancreas. All right, so what are we doing here? All right, so we already said the amylase. I said bicarb. It also provides insulin. And what does insulin do? So insulin is going to control the blood sugar, right? All right, it's going to regulate. Regulate glucose. All right. Now we can talk about the liver. All right, so let's talk about the functions of the liver. So it secretes bile. And what does bile do? It breaks down fats. When you go get your quarter pounder, that's what it does. Okay, it breaks down fats. All right. So what else does the liver do? Well, it filters toxic substances produced during digestion. So what I'm going to do is just produce toxins. So that's what I'm going to put instead. Filters toxins produced during digestion. All right. Okay, so it's going to create glucose stores. It's going to store some glucose. So we need that, right? We need that backup, and that's kind of where the backup comes from. And it provides blood clotting. and immune functions. So the liver does a lot. The liver does a lot. Okay. Alright guys, we're going 30 minutes. I'll come back with a different video, video number 2 shortly.